First of all, have I got any apologies? I think we've got a full house this evening. Councillor Fowle, yes, he's on holiday, so he won't be here. We've got minutes of the 9th of January and the 22nd of January. Are you agreeable that I sign those as a true record of the meeting? Right, been seconded, thank you. Any declarations of interest? Please make them at the appropriate time. Item 4, there is one item, which is item 17, to be dealt with as part 2. We have no member questions from the members of the public, and
you're going to ask for clarification on why the rationale for the item being in part 2. I just wonder if we get an answer that we raised it with a meeting earlier last week.
No, it'll be part 2 for this meeting. I said I'll ask and see whether or not it would go into part 1 at the full council meeting. Right, I'll deal with it in that way.
Right, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you anyway. Item 6 is the annual review of the One Exeter programme, and you will see that we have a recommendation that we note the programme, and this is Bindu, if you'd like to talk to the paper, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. I'm going to hand over in a second to Lorraine Betts, who's a programme manager for One Exeter, to take you through the key aspects of the programme and progress over the last year. But just by way of context, as identified in section 8 of the report before you, One Exeter is our organisational change programme and is a crucial priority for the council. So we send update reports every year so members can be informed and comment on the work that's being done. And this work is a combination of work that initially started to help us identify the cost reductions that were needed as part of our medium-term financial plan. It then expanded to incorporate some other organisational improvement aspects which were designed to deliver on members' priority of a fit-for-purpose council. This work, since I think certainly the last year or so, has been expanded to pick up other aspects of improvement that the council needed to look at, including some work that was produced for us by the Local Government Association through their decision-making and accountability work they did with the council, and that is referenced in the report. Just to say, before I hand over to Lorraine, if I may, Chair, this work has been done primarily via the Strategic Management Board and the Operational Management Board, and Lorraine has done a great job for pulling it together for us. And I'd like to thank SMB and OMB, who have done this alongside their existing service responsibilities. I think it's fair to say that I set quite a pace to it, and we're pretty much on target to deliver the things that we hope to. So I'll hand over to you, if I can, Lorraine, just to take through the main aspects.
Thank you, Bindu. So just to add to what Bindu said, to stress the importance of this work across the organisation, Bindu's always been the sponsor for this work, but on top of that now we've assigned each of the various work streams within the programme to a strategic director. So a strategic director is responsible for the delivery of every work stream that's identified in the plan that you've got there as Appendix B. So what I thought I'd do is just summarise some of the achievements that we've had over the last year, and then talk about some of the work that we'll be doing over the year ahead. And I think it's something we should be, as Bindu said, something we should be really proud of, because we've done this on top of everybody doing their day jobs as well. So one area of work that we've looked at over the last year is to introduce a new values and behaviours framework. And we did this in collaboration with staff. So we created a staff group, and we said, what's important to you? What are the things you value as an organisation and as a member of staff? And we created a set of values and some behaviours that we think reflect the type of behaviour we should be modelling to show that we're demonstrating those values. So that's all in place now, and that's being shared with staff. It was also an overview of it was included in the corporate plan, but obviously that will be shared more widely in the next version of the corporate plan. Going back to what Bindu was saying, we commissioned the Local Government Association to undertake a decision-making and accountability review. So that's to understand how and where decisions are made across the organisation. And as a result of that, they put forward a number of recommendations for areas of work that we would need to look at. We've attached a summary of the DMA report to the One Exeter report that has been shared with you. And what I thought it might be helpful to do is just talk through some of those recommendations and what we've done in response to them. So one of the first areas that they identified is that at the moment as an organisation, we're still very much silo-based. So through the restructure that Bindu's been looking at, hopefully she'll be looking to address some of that and look at ways that we can work more collaboratively and break down those silos. And as you'll know, there's a report going to Council on the 20th of February where you'll get more information about that. We've also done some work around creating an extended leadership team. So whereas before we had a strategic management board that met, and that was made up of all the directors, and an operational management board that met, made up of the operational managers, those teams have been brought together now, so they meet once every quarter, and they come together really to look at cross-cutting issues that they can solve together rather than everybody looking at them in isolation. So that's one piece of work that's been introduced to try and break down those silos. Something else that we did is we've undertaken a review of cross-cutting functions. So as part of the service review work that we did, we identified pieces of work that was being carried out across the organisation that were quite similar. So things like health and safety, there's pockets of health and safety that's being done in lots of different services. There's pockets of work around facilities management that's being done in lots of different services. So we've just done some work to try and understand what work is happening across the organisation and whether there are opportunities to try and do that work differently or potentially bring bits of work together to again break down those silos and different areas of across the organisation. There was a recommendation in there that we need to do some more work to improve our internal communications, and in response to that, we put regular messages in the staff newsletter now every 2 weeks from Bindu, so everybody knows what's going on organisationally and strategically, and also some of Bindu's personal highlights, so going out, meeting teams, what she's learned, issues she's picked up, that type of thing. And another big area of work, which was really well received this year, was we held a series of all staff meetings. So all staff were invited to attend a meeting with the Strategic Management Board. The purpose of that meeting was to bring everyone together, because a lot of people hadn't seen each other since before the pandemic, but also to talk about priorities, talk about the values and behaviours, talk about the results of the staff survey and what we're doing in response to that. And really just to sort of reset the organisation and say, we've got a new chief executive in place, different values, different behaviours, we're changing and let's do it all together, that type of thing. There was a recommendation around future leaders. So as part of the work that will be done through the leadership restructure, there'll be a management and development programme that's introduced. And we're also looking at developing a workforce plan, which will look at recruitment, retention and succession planning. Finally, there was a recommendation about having an ICT which was fit for purpose. And so there's been a lot of work that's been done around our digital customer strategy, and there was a report that was brought in November around that. We've done a lot of work around rolling out Microsoft 365 to the organisation, and the next phase will be to get that rolled out to members. And we've also done lots of work. There's been lots of work taking place within Strata to develop their business plan, which is aligned to the priorities that we've set out within our customer strategy. In terms of next year, there's lots of plans for the year ahead as well. So We're doing more work around what support we need in place to support our staff, to develop them, to provide them with opportunities to progress, and to have the right skills and knowledge to support all of the transformation work that we want to do. We're going to start work on delivering the customer strategy. We're going to develop a data strategy. So we know we've got lots of information across the organisation, and that we need to look at how we can manage that better and comply with our responsibilities around information governance. We're looking to introduce a performance management framework. So we'll be using all that, we'll be capturing data to help us to determine whether we're delivering against our priorities and whether there's areas that we need to improve. We'll be looking about our responsibilities around equalities, diversity and inclusion, and whether there are opportunities and for improvement and areas of work that we could do differently. And then we're doing a piece of work around how we can remodel the workspace within the Civic to create an environment which is more conducive to that collaborative working. So that's a piece of work that we're about to start now. And I think that's it. But we've summarised everything in the report, so if anybody's got any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Thank you, Lorraine. Yeah, a lot going on there, and as I say, this is only a report that we're noting the progress. So does any of the leaders wish to make a contribution? Councillor Moore.
Thank you very much. It's very helpful to read about all the work that you've put into this, because it's really not easy. I have a general question, which is about the risk register, the strategic risks, which identifies the focus on the change process. But I'm wondering about the outcome of that change process and the impact on quality of service and the ability to meet potentially increased demand given cuts to other local organisations. So I wondered about that. And on page 32, there's an identification in relation to potential review of discretionary services, which is indicated that it will be taking place during this year, not next year, during this forthcoming financial year, not the year after. So I'm wondering what will be the trigger point for that, so that we don't have a last minute flurry for cuts.
Okay, Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. This is, as we know, a very broad report that covers a multi-layered approach to looking at the working as an organisation. There's just two suggestions I'd like to make, or might like to take on board. I've mentioned it before. I think it would be helpful after May the 2nd this year if there could be a members briefing on the aspects of this, because it does affect the way the organisation organically works. And I think it's important that all councillors are on board and buying into the changes that are happening. I think after that might be a useful time to consider, and you might have something at that stage. The other thing is an aspect, I think, which isn't mentioned in the report, and I don't know whether you feel it fits in. You casually mentioned it, which is customer and member facing. The aspect of the customer in relation, because many of us are customers as well as being members, and the way the member relationship, particularly portfolio holders and leaders, fit into this style of arrangement. Because if the methodology is changing within the organisation, it might have impact on the way an administration works as well, and I think that needs to be considered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to play it differently in future. I'm not going to call in you individually. Just raise your hand, and then I'll deal with you. Councillor Johnson.
I've no particular question. Thank you very much for a very comprehensive summary, but I would like to support the suggestion of a members briefing.
Okay, I'll open it up now to any other members of the executive. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you very much for this extensive report and the work that has been going on over the last year plus on it. And it's very noticeable in a lot of areas, the changes that have been made and the better ways of working and communication amongst teams. Obviously, this is a journey that will carry on, but it really is noticeable. So thank you very much for that. I like the way that you've just accounted for the LGA summary and the things that they found that need improvement, and have every faith that that's going to happen. Just picking up on something Councillor Mitchell said, Lorraine and I started work on how to match this up with how executive members work with their directors, and that was going to be rolled out. So it's me that's lacking on that I haven't kept up with the pace of Lorraine's work and under Bindu. But that is something that we'll be talking with members about, because we do need to start matching it up. So absolutely, and we will do that. But thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other member wish to make a contribution? Councillor Parkhouse.
Yeah, thank you for the report. I've got two questions. The first is just for the chief executive, just wondering how the all staff meetings went and what your main sort of takeaways were from them, because I think it's a really good opportunity, as you were saying, Lorraine, that a lot of these people haven't come together since before the pandemic. And then the second question, I noticed in the LGA report, it talks about a lack of administrative support, and staff reporting that they've got lots of administration duties within their role and taking them away from core responsibilities. I was wondering how that specifically is being addressed, probably by one of the things you mentioned, but just curious about that.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? No. Oh, Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Just one question. In section 8.5.1, it's on the draft green travel plan, which has been prepared, and it said it's going to be considered by SMB in February. So is that or something that was an SMB day yesterday? So is it on a future one? It's not. Okay, that was it. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, Bindu and Lorraine, if first of all can deal with those couple of questions quickly from the members, if at all possible, first.
I'll have a go, Chair, and I'm sure Lorraine will pick up any gaps in my answers. So, in terms of the all-staff meetings, so my perception is they were very positive. I think staff really appreciated seeing all of SMB together in one place and being able to engage with them. And I hadn't fully appreciated that a lot of staff have never had kind of any interaction with directors who weren't their director. And were quite curious about who they were. So we did quite an informal session, and I think it was very well received. Part of what I think staff said to us very clearly is how much they missed the opportunity to come together as teams, and how they missed some of that ability to bump into people in the corridors and kind of share experiences with them. There were a lot of questions about resources and some of the financial challenges that the council had. But I think overall, and I speak on behalf of SMB, we were left with that kind of ongoing reassurance that we've got brilliant, committed staff. They had lots of great questions about the council and its workings, and lots of really helpful suggestions about things that we could do differently. I think we have summarised some of the questions that were put to us, and a kind of summary of what was discussed at those sessions. I see no reason, Chair, why we couldn't make that information available to members, because I think you might get the warm glow that in the main we got from those sessions. So happy to do that. In terms of the LGA's finding around admin support, so there's a couple of aspects to that. The council very deliberately, in a previous transformation programme that was supported by an outside consultancy, Vanguard, took a view about admin support. So unfortunately, admin support is one of those almost invisible back office functions that when we're looking to find cost reductions, we go for admin because it seems to be somehow an expensive luxury. But if the admin isn't being done by admin people, it has to be done elsewhere. And what ends up happening is we need to be thoughtful about who's doing that admin now, and is that being done at the right grade? Because do you really want someone who has a professional specialism spending their time doing admin tasks? So one thing we definitely need to do is understand more how we can use automation and some of the digital work with Strata to reduce the amount of admin that we do. A second thing we need to do is during our service reviews, make sure we're being as efficient as possible in understanding what our admin is. And then the third thing we'll need to do is, once we are in the process of the restructure that Lorraine alluded to, and will be coming before members on the 20th of February, is to understand where in the council have we disinvested for really good reasons at the time, where we're now understanding the impact it might be having on the wider organisation. So I hope that answers your questions.
Okay, thank you. As I said, this is a progress report. We got the 20th of January where you're doing about the restructure. Councillor Mitchell, in relation to a briefing, I feel sure there will be something others. Much will be revealed as we go forward. Councillor Moore, you came into some detail of what's going on, and I really think we need to have a look at that and reply to that in detail. Because that's a detailed thing as opposed to just receiving the report and going on. Okay, so we've got a recommendation here that we note the progress. I want to move it from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? All those in favour?
That's unanimous, Chair. That has been carried.
Thank you very much. Move on to item 7 now, which is the General Fund and HRI Estimates and Capital Programme 24-25. There are a series of recommendations here, which you can see on page 47. And so I'm going to ask Dave to talk to his recommendations. David.
Thank you, Chair. This is the annual precursor to the extraordinary meeting next week, where Council will approve a budget and set the council tax next week on 20th of February. My apologies. And set the council tax for the city of Exeter. So in respect of the report, I'll just give you some updated information. The local government final settlement was announced yesterday, and with remarkable clairvoyance, the council did indeed get an extra £140,000 as a result of the additional funds that were announced in late January by the government. So we have 140,000 extra that's not included within this budget. It's not clear as to whether that's a one-off or whether it's going to be built into the base for future funding settlements. Of course, we have a general election this year, so that will be up to whichever party forms the next government. In terms of council tax, the referendum threshold was confirmed as less than 3% or £5 for a district council. An increase of 2.99% for Exeter is an increase of £5.24, so slightly higher than the £5 option. And new homes bonus was confirmed at 485,000 for the council. I thought members might be interested to note that its continued life means we have finally tipped over £30 million of new homes bonus over the life of that funding. So in terms of looking forward, we're proposing a balanced budget for 2024-25, but there's much work that remains to be done. We still need to identify further reductions totaling 5.6 million over the next 3 years after next year. And currently we have proposals covering around 1.5 million of that amount. So there's around 4.15 million still to be identified, and that's a significant amount for a district council with a net budget of around £17 million. So there's some really difficult decisions that we need to take over the next year in particular. In terms of the council tax budget requirements, so the recommendation to executive to recommend to council is an increase of 2.99%, which, as I said, will result in an increase of £5.24 on a Band D council tax. And that would give us 7.17 million of council tax when you take into account the surplus on the collection fund and the increase in the council tax base. 2.99% increase will take Band D council tax for Exeter City Council's element to £180.37. In terms of the housing revenue account, got a balanced budget with their reserve level remaining above the minimum level. Quite a small take from the HRA working balance of around £208,000. As members will recall, in January you approved a 7.7% increase in rents. That equates to about an average increase of £6.65 per week over 52 weeks. And finally, in respect of the capital programme, the General Fund capital programme being proposed for next year is £15 million. I would say there's likely to be a significant carry forward from this year into next year as well, which we'll seek approval for in July once the accounts for this financial year are closed. Of that 15 million, only 368,000 relates to new bids, and they're all for IT equipment to support. We have an aging, in particular, aging laptops. Some of our staff are working on laptops that are 8 years old and are likely to fall over at any moment. So we need to invest in new IT equipment to support our staff in doing their jobs. But as with the MRF, members will recall, at this moment in time, we don't have any capital resources available. So we're seeking the same recommendation as we did for the MRF, with a delegated authority to myself with the leader to allow the go-ahead of these new bids once suitable capital resources have been identified. Now, what I would say is that we have sold a couple of assets that once the money comes in, that funds will be available and will cover the new bids identified in this, unfortunately not a MRF. The housing revenue account capital programme is 18 million pounds, 12.5 million for improvements to the existing stock and 5.5 million to complete Vaughan Road Phase A. And the other thing I'd like to draw members' attention to is on page 59 and 60, which is the section 25 statement that I have to make about the adequacy of reserves and the robustness of the estimates. And we've done a significant, I have done a significant amount of work on this to really stress test the level of reserves for both the General Fund and the HRA. And we've moved to a process of risk assessment and identifying risks and why we hold the reserve, and setting aside appropriate amounts to mitigate those risks. So if you look, there's a table for each, for both the General Fund and the HRA, which sets out the risks. So if we take the first one on the General Fund, when you set the budget in February, there are certain inflationary pressures that you do not know what they are. So most importantly, because you have a significant amount of staff, we do not know what the pay award is for next year. So we make an estimate within the budgets, but there's a risk that it could come out higher than we anticipate. So we hold money to protect against the fact that we will have an additional cost mid-year, and we don't particularly want to come back to members and say, you need to cut things to ensure that we can still pay our staff. So there's a whole range of them there. And taking that all into account, we're looking at a minimum reserve balance of £3,020,000, which is within £20,000 of what our existing minimum reserve level is. In respect of the HRA, however, using the same approach, I'm recommending to you that you can reduce the minimum reserve level on the HRA from £4 million down to 3.525 million, which will free up a one-off £475,000, which is available to the HRA to cover existing expenditure. As with all financial decisions, ultimately it's a member decision, but you can see the reasoning behind why I'm recommending those figures. So in terms of the final report, obviously, as Devon County Council, Devon and Somerset Fire and Rescue, and Devon and Cornwall Police and Crime Commissioner meet and sets their precepts, then we'll update the figures and bring those to council for final approval. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, David. So at first I thought we had £140,000 that we could go and spend, but just listening to you for the last few minutes, you're basically telling us that we can't really go and spend that with what we've got to do next year. So sorry, everybody, to be the bearer of that bit of disappointment. So let's not get carried away with that one. So to the opposition leaders, anyone who wants to say? Councillor Moore.
Thank you. So particularly wish to speak to recommendation 2.1.3, which is about what members need to consider. 2 years ago, the auditors recommended that there is a consultation with the public on the council's budget, and there's been a web page up on the council's website since the autumn. However, there's been no consultation taking place, so I wondered why that was. Thank you.
Good point. Councillor Mitchell, did you want to say something?
Comment rather than a question. First of all, thank David and his staff for making something that's often quite penetrable for the lay person, even if it still does take 60 pages to get the message across. The one concern I think we would all have is the volatility of local government finance and the way in which council tax now is becoming a decreasing factor, but is our only stable income, that we're so reliant as an authority on factors outside our control. And I'm particularly worried about the income side, which we've mentioned before. Members are aware about the potential loss of £1 million on car parking and where that takes us in the future, because of the impact it has on our ability for statutory and discretionary services. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Any other member of the committee wish to say anything? Councillor Wright.
Thank you. Yeah, just again, thank you for the budget report, and to echo what Councillor Mitchell said, us trying to having to rely on yet another tax imposed on people of this country, and we are one of the highest taxers across Europe, apparently. But being able to look at the budget in this way, I'm sure that what we will eventually decide on will be for the rest of the people. I'm just going to update on the Police and Crime Commissioners panel. The precept was voted through at a rise of £12.97 for the police. So just thought that might be helpful.
Thank you. If there's no further questions, Dave, can you deal with that consultation issue, which I feel is quite relevant, or lack of?
So it's right. It's one of the things that we need to do, and we need to start it earlier. It needs to be part of a wider consultation piece around the council and its priorities, and therefore we're working on producing something much more comprehensive for next year, when you have significant issues, and consultation will be really important because of the size of the challenge that you face. So it's something that we know we need to do. We're good at one aspect of it, in that we meet with the business community and consult with them, and therefore we do need to strengthen this, and plans are in place to get that undergoing next year.
Right, thank you, David. So we've got 6 recommendations here, which I move from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please?
Yes.
All those in favour of those recommendations, please show. Thank you. Agenda 8 is the capital strategy 24-25, and we've got one recommendation here that we approve the strategy set out in Appendix 1. David?
Thank you, Chair. So this is the annual capital strategy, one of our many statutory reports that we have to produce. I'll just go through the change to it. So broadly similar to last year's strategy, with the exception that a change in accounting standards means that leases that used to be what were called operating leases, so were charged direct to the revenue account, have now become capital and sit on our balance sheet as an asset that we have the use of, and therefore, rather than charging when we pay the rent, charging it direct to the service, we now charge it to repayment of borrowing and interest. So in terms of financial impact, absolutely zero to the council, but we have to add it to our capital strategy because these, what were revenue provisions, are now classed as capital assets. That's the only change.
Thank you, David. Leaders, any questions? Councillor Moore.
Thank you. So I'd like to speak to point 7 on page 101. So there's previously been a review of the portfolio and prioritised investment based upon the level of risk. So what's currently in the worst state, and that led to the 41 million in the budget. So this talks about a further review of capital assets. So I'd like to know what the criteria is for that review. So what basis will they be assessed on, and how long will this take? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member wish to add anything? No? So Dave, we can deal with that question here, I would have thought. What is the criteria and what has changed from last year's criteria?
So in terms of the programme, there's no planned changes in the capital programme this year. But obviously we have officers who go out and assess the condition of assets and will amend accordingly. So it could be that there's the ability to protect an asset in a slightly different way that maybe costs less, but extends its life, that maybe will bring something forward. It could be that another asset deteriorates so far that actually its priority shifts up. So it's a constant checking, inspection and review process. Alongside that, we need to undertake a further condition survey of the leisure portfolio. Now it's back in-house, just to make sure. The last condition survey is a little out of date now. So we need to look at that and make sure that that's built in alongside.
Thank you, David. So there we have. We've got one recommendation there, which I move from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? All those in favour?
Chair, that has been carried.
Thank you. We move on now to item 9, which is the Prudential Code for Capital Finance in Local Authorities. And we've got 2 recommendations here. David.
Thank you, Chair. Everybody's favourite report of the year. So this is the report setting out the potential indicators which govern the affordability and prudence of our capital programme, and the annual statement of minimum revenue provision, which to the layperson is the repayment of debt and the amount that we statutorily have to set aside. So if we go for the minimum revenue provision first, because that's in the main body of the report, no changes proposed to the method we use. So we, broadly speaking, use an annuity method, which is the same as a repayment mortgage, in that we borrow money and then we repay the principal along with interest over the life of the borrowing and the asset. We also, on occasion, will use the equal principal repayment method, which is where you pay interest but you pay the same amount of principal each year. But we rarely, very, very rarely use that. We tend to use the annuity method. With an annuity method, your payment stays the same across the life of the debt. It's just the amounts of interest and principal change within that. Two other areas I'd like to highlight for you. The proposed MRP charge for next year is 1.905 million. Of that, 74,000 relates to the leases I just mentioned. So is a transfer from another part of the budget to cover that. And finally, DLUC allow councils to make overpayments. We made a significant amount of overpayments during the late 2010s, and at the end of this financial year, the total amount of overpayments available is 0.7 million, which we are proposing to use in next year's budget to offset the MRP. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, David. Opposition leaders? Any other member of the committee? Okay, so we've got a recommendation. There are two recommendations. I'm going to move formally from the chair. Second it. All. Thank you very much. So we now move on to item 10, Treasury Management Strategy. We've got one recommendation here, that the adoption of the strategy and delegations. David.
Thank you, Chair. This is the next statutory report, which is our Treasury Management Strategy and governs the way we invest money and borrow money. Just to pick out a few highlights for you from the strategy. The strategy sets out the amount we currently have placed with other local authorities and with a couple of banks, which is currently stands at around £20 million. We have £5 million in the CCLA property fund and around 23 million with money market funds. Money market funds are popular because you can withdraw the money on any given day, and they also spread the risk in that they're spread across a range of organisations. In section 3.2 of the strategy, set out our physical long-term borrowing. All borrowing has been undertaken through the PWLB. Part of it relates to the HRA and the rest to the general fund. And then section 3.4 sets out the implications of our treasury management. So our net interest we expect to pay on the general fund is around 1.4 million, and the net interest we expect to pay on the HRA is around 1.4 million. So very similar impacts. As members will be aware, the general fund pays the HRA interest for the balances that it has, which it invests on behalf of the HRA, and that brings down its overall costs. Section 4.3 on page 133 sets out the types of institutions that you allow me to invest in. Nothing's changed within that section, so we're not proposing any changes to those type of institutions. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, David. Leaders? Councillor Mitchell. You've got the mic.
Just a question to David on para 3.2 on borrowing. You indicate in the table as the HRA, which is straightforward enough, and the 93 million of capital of borrowing in relation to the general fund. Is any of that borrowing for the general fund hypothecated to a particular service or section, or does it have to be met by the general fund? That was a question on that one, so I'm unclear. And secondly, second question, final question, on 4.3, you talk of UK-owned banks. what defines a UK-owned bank? Would HSBC be a UK-owned bank?
Okay, good question. I'd like to know the answer to that one. Co-op bank. Anyway, Councillor Moore.
Thank you very much for your report. I would like to know what advice you have received as a result of the recommendation from the Scrutiny Committee to receive advice on the climate impacts of the Council's investments. The reports continue to say there are no direct climate impacts. I would really welcome a report in the list that's contained in point 10 throughout the year, which shows a reflection of the action that the Council's taken in response to the climate impacts of the investments that we make as a council. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other contributions from the committee? No. So we've got a couple of things there, Dave. I think we can answer them quickly here and now about the 93 million. Is anything? That's an easy answer, yes and no. And if there is a detail, I think that could be sent to everybody. We don't want you to run through everything if there is something, and particularly about the banks. What if you know who the shareholders are for some of these banks, and then obviously about the climate change. If you can deal with that, please. If you could do that.
Thank you. So in terms of the debt, it is not under accounting regulations. It's not assigned to a particular service. It is a below the line, as they call it, cost and charge. So both interest payable and the repayment of debt are below the line items and don't need to be directly attributed to individual services. And therefore we don't, although for particular assets such as the commercial properties that we purchased, then we do notionally keep those debts that we've taken against those properties to ensure they're still performing. In terms of the banks, so by law, we have to have Treasury Management Advisors. Treasury Management Advisors provide us with our list of counterparties in line with our approved list. And yes, they do class HSBC as a UK-owned bank. Still listed on the UK stock market, although they keep threatening, I think. And in terms of the climate impacts, I thought I'd reported this back, but it's absolutely clear that the financial services industry is not well set up, and they struggle to provide evidence one way or the other of the climate impact. So it would be really, really difficult for us to be able to report in detail on deposits that we make, how that money is used, and what the impact is of that. We try our best, so we use with the bank, and the banks are the biggest challenge, but equally, when we lend money to Blackpool Borough Council, we don't specifically know what Blackpool Borough Council do with that money, and therefore it's almost impossible. They have no responsibility to tell us how they're going to use that 5 million. It's just cash.
All right, thank you, David. So we've got a recommendation here. I'm going to move it from the chair. All those in seconder, please. Councillor Wright. All those in favour?
That's unanimous, Chair. That has been carried.
And we move on to item 11, which is Housing Benefit Modified Scheme Policy. And here we've got one recommendation that we approve the proposed scheme. David?
Thank you, Chair. So this is to seek your approval to reapprove the existing Housing Benefit Modified Scheme Policy. So way back in the 1980s, I'm not going to suggest any of you responsible for approving this. Way back in the 1980s, Council approved a modified scheme around war pensions and disregards, and we're seeking your approval to reaffirm your support of that. We are doing this because the auditors keep asking us for evidence of it when they audit the housing benefits subsidy, and whilst we know you approved it, we can't find the actual resolution, and therefore we're seeking an updated one, so it will be more straightforward to prove to the auditors.
Thank you, David. I was here and my mother was in receipt of it, so I know it happened. Leaders? No? Okay. Anybody want to? Councillor Pierce and then then I'll come on to you, Barbara.
Yeah, thanks, Dave, for bringing this forward. I think it's really important that we can clarify this and get something written down so we can prove that we want to support these people in this way. I think it's vital that the council continues to do so, because we need to remember that the people who receive these benefits either do so because they themselves served or their loved ones served our country. And I think it's the least we can do is to repay that service with a little bit of financial support going to them. So hopefully this will be approved by full council in a week or so's time. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Denning.
Thank you, Councillor Bialik. As a portfolio holder, when we had a discussion about this, I thought it was, thank you, Councillor Moss. I thought it was unbelievable that we couldn't find it, but apparently some poor chap had to go down to the archives and they still couldn't find it. So there's been great attempts to find the actual meeting where this was agreed. I echo Councillor Pearce's in what he says, and we never know when we need these benefits ourselves. So I would say that we should agree to this recommendation. I'm pretty sure that nobody would refuse benefits to somebody who's fought for our country. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I'm going to move it formally from the chair. If I can have a seconder, please. All those in favour?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. We now move on to item 12, which is the Local Tax Support Scheme 24-25. We've got one recommendation here, and as you know, we've dealt with this before, so it shouldn't take too long. David.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is the outcome of the consultation into the proposed amendment to the Local Council Tax Support Scheme to support carers in Devon, care leavers in Devon. So 44 responses, 39 in favour, 5 against. Most importantly, the preceptors who are affected by this change are all in favour of us adopting the revised scheme, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, David. Leaders? Any members? Councillor Denning?
Thank you, Leader. Yet again, this has come to us. What I'd like to say is that it was great to see the actual comments that were made in the consultation in support of this. I know there are only 5 that said against, but it's pretty obvious that the people of Exeter actually support this recommendation, and they understand that the hardship that these young care leavers have in getting a, I'm going to say, normal life to us, but to them it's hard work, and we are their parents in a respect. So yet again, I will say please pass this recommendation.
Thanks, Chair. Just want to say thanks again, really, for bringing forward this report. I think it's really important, actually, that we, as a council, are adopting this as a formal policy position. Some of our district colleagues just made the decision partway through the year to introduce it just as a discretionary matter, and they'll then have to keep spending time returning to that every year until they formally adopt it as a policy. So I think it's really good that we've taken the time already to get our ducks in a row, get it all lined up properly, and have a formal policy position which will remain in place forever now, hopefully. Thank you for the work you've done on this.
Okay, thank you. If there's nobody else, no questions there. So we've got the recommendation. I'll move it from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? All those in favour? Thank Agenda item 13, which is the council tax empty homes and second homes premiums 24-25. A number of recommendations there, and this one is over to you again, David.
I'm pleased to say this is the last you have to hear from me for a little while. I'll be back at the end. So again, this is a report that has already been to the executive and on to full council. It's coming back to you now that the regulations have formally been laid in Parliament and passed, and therefore we're seeking council approval to formally implement the 100% premium on empty homes from 1 year instead of 2 years, and the premium in respect of second homes. Don't intend to go through it all again, so I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, David. Leaders? Okay, yeah, another good one. Any members wish to comment? No, it's all been said anyway, but thank you. It is an important document, and I know it's also shared with a lot of the other districts as well. So those are the 4 recommendations. I'll move from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? All those in favour?
That is unanimous, Chair. That has been carried.
Thank you. And so now we'll move on to item 14, which is the gender pay cap. And here we have a report and some recommendations. And I'm going to ask Barn to talk to the recommendations, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this is a statutory report that I'm obliged to bring to you annually, and we are any employer who employs more than 250 members of staff is required to produce a report which compares the difference in pay between males and females. You'll see from the report that our findings for Exeter are found on in a paragraph on page 190, and essentially what that tells us is that on average, or that the average rate of pay for females working for Exeter City Council is higher than males, and that average has decreased since last year, and that there are nearly 3 times more males in the lower quarter of pay than females. It always brings me pleasure to bring this report to you, frankly, because it shows that we are absolutely bucking the national trend. I did a bit of Google searching before I came to this meeting today, and what I found is that according to the Office of National Statistics, the ONS, the median hourly pay for full-time employees was 6.7% less for women than for men. And also, the research I did suggest that I reckon it's going to take something like 28 years to close the gap between men and women's pay. And if you compare that globally, my research suggests that it's going to take something like 100 years to close the gap in terms of males and females. That's according to the World Economic Forum. So really pleased to say to you that Exeter bucks the trend. On average, the female pay is more than the male pay, but the more detailed results are shown on page 193 if you want to have a look at that. We're very happy to take the questions.
Thank you. Leaders? Councillor Mitchell?
Just one question.
Right. Often this relationship on pay is by the nature of the occupations involved in the structure of an organisation, whether they're predominantly male or female, administrative, manual or whatever. And clearly that can be demonstrated with these figures. What I was going to ask is, do we gather any information in regard to male and female pay for similar levels of work in the same organisation? In other words, if you've got 20 people all doing a similar job and all classified in a similar way, is there a discrimination there in favour of one gender or the other?
Thank you. Well, any other members wish to make a contribution? Councillor Wright.
Thank you. Just a quick question. I remember when this came to us last year, we talked about the fact that there are more males in the lower quartile of earnings, and we know why
that is. But I'm sure I've noticed a slight change in that. Is this figure exactly as it was last year? Was it a bit more than 3 times?
Okay.
Last year, has that gone down a bit? Because I know there's been a bit of a push for recruiting females into like the waste operations.
Okay, is there anybody else wanting to say anything? So if you can answer that quickly, what Councillor Mitchell said, I assume we're following what we're meant to do, as opposed to.
Yeah, absolutely. The JE process does not discriminate between males and females, and it just compares jobs of a like kind, so there is no issue for us there.
And is there the trend? Well, Councillor Wright was really talking about a trend there.
I'll have to go and have a look at that.
Well, that would be interesting to see.
But the gap is reducing.
And just for future reports, it would be interesting to see, like next year, where the trend is going. If there is indeed a trend, that may be an idea. So we have the recommendations. Mind the gap. All those, I move it from second it. All those in favour? Thank you. Item 15 is the annual pay policy statement, and there's 4 recommendations here, and this is Bindu.
Thank you, Chair. So similar to the last item, it is also a statutory requirement that we produce an annual pay policy, which addresses the areas that are set out for members in section 6 of the report. The draft policy before members should be considered in the context that's set out in section 8 of the report, and members are therefore asked to note that the appendix may need to be amended before the next year's review is due, because there are some moving parts at the moment. And once we finalise those, we'll be able to make whatever appropriate amendments are required to the appendix, and obviously bring that back to members for agreement at that point. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. Leaders? No. Members of the committee? No. Okay, so we've got 4 recommendations there. I'm going to move them from the chair. All and seconder, please. All those in favour?
That's unanimous, Chair. That has been carried.
Thank you. We're now coming on to item 16, which is the Article 4 direction. George, you've been waiting. Clearly, you wanted to sit through all of this, and
very
I'm
keen
impressed.
to sit through this.
I'm really impressed that you didn't ask for this to come first, which we should have done. So you clearly get a life, mate. Right, okay. So
let's hope this can be brief.
Review of recommendations here. George, if you can talk us through the paper, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I think this is probably the 4th time this broad topic has been before you. Started out with a resolution to update the Article 4 direction, followed by papers relating to evidence and options and consultation on options for extending the direction. We came back with a recommended preferred option and the making of the direction, which Council passed back in December. We've subsequently notified interested parties in the intervening couple of months, and now we're coming back, going through the next stage of the legal process of amending the direction, which is called the confirmation stage. So this doesn't change the provisions or the revisions that we're making in the amended Article 4 direction and the associated area. It's just simply the next stage in that legal process. Assuming that the Executive and Council move to confirm the direction, we would go through another stage of notifying interested parties, so residents, estate agents, various stakeholders. And then at that point, we'd wait until the end of the year, at which point the revised direction would be implemented.
Okay, thank you, George. Basically, this is all about procedure. We've made the decisions in effect. Nothing has changed. This is about a process going forward. Okay, leaders. Councillor Moore.
Thank you very much. I wonder if you can explain what the annual monitoring arrangements will be to assess the impacts of this policy, please.
Okay, good. Councillor Mitchell. Very good for your upper body, all this, by the way.
Thank you.
Just thought,
I'll bring
Anyway,
a ball and kick as well next time. All right. Thank you. And thank you, George, for giving me some time last week to talk through this and some of the issues that I had with it. Yes, all the time, this is a reactive process. In 2014, we reacted to a situation. We have public concern this time when we reacted and taken on board some of their concerns. I've only got a specific concern in regard to my own ward, which sounds a bit parochial in a way, but
well, this is about the process.
Yeah, about the process.
About the process.
It links in. St James is the one with the highest number of HMOs currently in Exeter. Within the proposals, 3 areas have been left out within the ward, geographically within the ward, are not a part of the new Article 4 direction. What monitoring do we do? Because already residents have approached me where there are HMOs in those 3 areas, and already they're being approached by estate agents about sale for HMOs. So I'm concerned, is there an active process for monitoring?
Yeah.
So
right, thank you. I'm going to open this up now for other members. Any remarks? Or Councillor Parkhurst?
Yeah, I just want to thank you for coming back again. I know it feels like we see this every council meeting, but yeah, I appreciate you following a very complicated legal process to get us to a point where, at the end of this journey that started with the councillors in Pennsylvania sort of initiating this on the request of residents. So yeah, thank you for your hard work, and I do look forward to seeing this eventually. So it's good. It hasn't changed the schedule at all. It will come into force in December, is my understanding. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Councillor Morse.
This has been fun for the last year or so. Absolute joy talking about Article 4 directions. And they are really complex legal documents, and they involve a lot of data and a lot of evidence, otherwise they can't be enforced. The team have run a brilliant consultation. That data has been used to inform from members of the public how we move forward with this. I think there is an element of an Article 4 being a lot like this type of Article 4, because there are so many different types of Article 4, it's ridiculous. But this type of Article 4 being a bit like a residence parking consultation. We put residence parking in place, the next road along gets put, and that will happen forever until you get to a point where it's unviable for people to drive or whatever it is to the hospital or to town. It's going to be the same with students. We will continue to monitor to see if changes need to be made, but you're removing a planning development right. That's something you get when you buy a house. It goes with that house. So it's not an easy process that we can just every 5 minutes go outside to that, because actually you're removing a right, and that shouldn't be done simply or easily. So I wanted to thank the staff, because they've been working on it forever with all the other things that we've asked them to do, and also just to explain that I think we might see this a lot and think, blimey, it goes on, but the complexity is really quite large, and I think it's really important that we understand that. And obviously I support this because I think it is the right thing to do.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Just coming back, George, we will be monitoring this. We normally monitor it at Planning Member Working Group every year, don't we? And we would be monitoring that. Is the place we monitor it for councillors? Am I right in assuming that?
So yeah, we do monitor through our annual or generally annual updates in relation to student accommodation, which touches on HMOs, but also PBSA. In terms of how we monitor that, we'll be looking at council tax records and licensing arrangements. But we can do that through the member working group process, but we also have the authority monitoring report, which also goes to member working group annually and talks about various items, but also can talk about this as this progresses.
Thank you very much. So we got the recommendations there. I'm going to move from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? All those in favour?
As unanimous, Chair, that has been carried.
Thank you very much. I'll write it down for a script for you in future so you can remember it. Okay, we're now going to move, well, hopefully I'm going to move that we move into part 2 now, exclusive press and public. Can I have a seconder, please? All those in favour? Okay. Do we need to wait while all the public leave? No?